This video is showing the process and the results of the glazing that we are doing on the Ceramics One Skillbuilder of pinch and coil vase or bowl forms. This is an entry-level Skillbuilder in Ceramics One. I'm showing brushing and pouring and using underglazes, and these are the results that I'll be showing here. But this is the first time that my Ceramics 1 kids have used Cone 6 glazes. Now, students, the first thing you want to do is think about what kind of brush you want to use. My brushes are all together. They're the soft glaze brushes. You may want a whisk. You may want a little rubber spatula that you can stir up your glazes with. You always want to use the most appropriate brush for your form. So usually I tell people the biggest brush practical, and I have some of these great fan brushes there too. You want a big brush so it helps to put it on evenly. Now, if you have small detail areas, by all means, use a small brush. Those are located up on my desk. I keep the small brushes up there for safety so they don't get destroyed. Now you want to think about choosing your glaze. In my classroom, I have the Cone 6 glazes on the right side of the shelving. Those are the stoneware glazes on the right. We are going to be using a Coyote. Notice up there at the ceiling it says stoneware in case you forget. We're using Coyote brand. Now these glaze bottles all have the glaze name on it, and there's a little tube sample. There's a shelf tag, and on the sample, it also says the name of the glaze. It will also tell you what cart, what the cone is, which is cone 6. Now notice that there's a color coordination between the cart, the shelf tag, and the lid that, and my carts also have that color coordination. So like that cart 1 is the orange cart, cart 2 is the blue cart, cart 3 underneath the slab roller table is brown, and then I also have blue and red. And then you will see the information there on the glazes. Look at the sample and it will show you what the glaze looks like after it's fired. Now some are going to be great on texture. So if you have texture, Chinos are a great one on texture, and there's a whole Chino family. Another type of glaze is a Celadon glaze. Chinos break brown on texture, the Celadons break white. Ones that are not good on texture are the satin glazes. They're very opaque and they have a pretty even, smooth coverage. They don't show off your texture very well, so kind of pay attention to that. Now also look at glazes if they have any notes on them. So you can see here, these glazes have stop signs. These are part of the Archie's base series, and it gives you directions. It says layer inside or on rims only. Don't use by itself on the exterior. It's very important that you pay attention to these directions because these Archie's base series glazes are a little bit finicky, and if you use them wrong, you can mess up your pot. So just pay attention to when you see stop signs or notes. And when you look at things for food safety, all of my Coyotes are food safe with the exception of this one peacock that I have, but it is clearly labeled as not food safe. Now, when you look at them, look for the notes, like these Celadons with the purple shelf tag. They say normally very good on texture, which they are great on texture. So you just want to kind of pay attention to that. The Chinos here, the Chino family, also great on texture. Now, if we look down here at the bottom row, these are two-step glazes. Two steps are designed with an undercoat and an overcoat. Marshmallow right here, it says right there, it's an overcoat. Blue Moon is an overcoat. It's designed to go on top of an undercoat. It can be used by itself, but to get the effect of the two-step, you're going to be using the undercoat, which right here I have licorice and coffee bean. Now, again, these are designed to go under, so you apply 3 coats of the undercoat and then 2 to 3 coats of the overcoat, and this is what it looks like. Licorice is on the left, coffee bean is on the right. You get more pronounced spots if you have more coats of the overcoat. And in the case of this, it's marshmallow and blue moon on top of those undercoats. Now we're going to be prepping the bisque pot before we glaze. You want to remove anything that's sharp. So grab one of the stilt stones, which it's just an abrasive stone. You want to go over anything that might have a sharp edge, something that maybe was left a little sharp after you had carved it or slip trailed, anything on the bottom. And then you want to give a really quick rinse. You don't want to saturate the piece too much, just a super quick rinse. It'll get off any of your loose dust. Then go ahead and grab the paint brushes that you want and condition the paint brushes just by wetting them down. It helps them to wash out more easily. Now, if you want to do underglaze in any detail, I have underglaze in little squeezy bottles, and I'm going to add that to my carving. The purpose of the underglaze is it can keep your glazes separate so they don't run together. If I just used a regular cone 6 glaze in those cracks, I would probably end up by having black run out. Now, this looks messy right now. Don't worry about that. I am going to be cleaning it. So I'm just putting the underglaze in all the cracks, and then I'll be tidying it up in a little bit. Here I'm also using underglaze as an accent detail around some of my sculptural flowers that I did, because I want the flowers to kind of pop out and stand out a little bit. And after that is dried, then I take a squeezed out, rinsed out sponge, and I'm just removing the extra underglaze that was outside of the grooves. I want to keep it in the grooves, so you always have to make sure your carving is deep enough that it will stay in the grooves. Doing the same thing around my little flowers, just trying to tidy this up a little bit. Again, the flowers, the purpose of this, it's just to help make it pop, and it also is going to make it a little bit easier to glaze. As you'll see when I glaze it, I don't have to be as precise with my glazes on top of the underglaze. Now let's talk about the application of the glaze. When you go to apply your glaze, if you have an issue like this where maybe the lid is stuck on, just run the lid, the edge of the lid, underneath water for a moment. That will get some water in there to loosen up some of the dried glaze. And then if you have something, and now you go ahead and mix it up thoroughly. You want it to be the consistency of a melted milkshake. If your glaze is a little bit thick, just like we've done on some of the other glazes that we've used so far, you may have to thin it. You want it to run nicely off of the brush. Now, on this, I'm going to be glazing the interior first on a vase, and I'm going to use a funnel because it'll help me get it in there. So I just add a little bit. I don't fill it up completely, and then I rotate it as I pour it out. Rotating it as I pour it out will help to ensure that I have a nice even coverage on the inside. And then I just wipe down any dribbles I got on the outside. After I have done the interior of anything little like this, then I'm going to go ahead and apply the glaze to the exterior. Now I'm just brushing. You want to use 3 brush coats on smooth texture areas, 2 on heavy texture areas. The reason for that is heavy textures will accumulate and hold more glaze. So we can get away with just 2 nice coats, even coats on heavy textures, 3 on smooth. Now, I did remove some of the extra glaze on the petal parts and the leaf parts, and now I'm just touching up with a little detail. Again, I need to keep track of my coats, so 3 coats on the stem and the leaves is what I'm doing here. And I'm, of course, using a small paintbrush. Now, for this bowl, I'm going to go ahead and do 3 coats on the inside, and that's light chino, 2 coats on the outside because the desert sage is going on the outside and that has heavy texture. You always want to allow your glazes to dry to the touch between your layers. If the glaze comes off and it gets on your hands, that means it's not dry enough. So it should be dry when you touch it in between the layers, and you want to keep count. And when you brush it, you want to load up your brush as much as you can and just spread that glaze around evenly. Now I've finished with the application of the base coats. Now this is an accent of red gold. You can see that red gold is one of the Archie's base that has the stop signs on it. And here I'm just doing some lines. I'm doing rings on the inside of it, and it's going to make some nice effects when it's fired. Here I'm also doing the interior first with the funnel, and I was doing alabaster satin on that. Now I'm using a teeny tiny brush to go over the little the panels here. Now, truth be told, I was kind of in a hurry when I did this, and I wasn't super careful. There is another means of applying glaze to small detail areas that I will show you later in the semester using a bulb syringe. But for today, we're just using brushes. And now I'm doing 3 coats of the pansy purple on the other parts. And for this bowl, I'm doing alabaster satin, 3 coats on the inside, key lime on the exterior, 3 coats, because again, it's smooth texture. And then I'll be doing dusty rose, 3 coats on the flowers. There's the dusty rose, using a small brush now. And I'll do pansy purple in the very center part of the flower there. And again, these are all 3 coats because it's a smooth texture. And wipe off the jars when you go to return them. Now, this is the pansy purple right there on the little dots on the inside. Now, this is going to be underglaze in carved texture, and I'm putting on rather messy in the case of this one because I know I'm going to sponge it off. So this is similar to what I did with the lines on the vase. Now, using a squeezed out sponge, I'm just taking off the extra, leaving it in the grooves. Now this one, I'm using a Celadon, which is transparent, going right over the glazes, and I'm only doing 2 coats over those textured areas, 3 on the others. And on the interior, I'm using lemon cream satin. Now, as I started to apply this, I found that it was clumping and drying quickly. So this is an additive that I'm putting with this. This little additive is called glycerin. This is what's in liquid soap that makes it slippery. There are different things that people can add, but I happen to have glycerin on hand. When I add a little bit that to the jar, then it helps it to go on more smoothly, and it doesn't dry and clump quite as much. Now, this does happen with some of the satins that I have, so pay attention. If your glaze is acting really weird and clumpy when you put it on, please let me know, and we'll put that additive in it. I'm using 3 coats of the lemon cream, and again 2 coats of that key lime on the outside. Now I'm cleaning up wherever I got the white alabaster satin or on top of the underglaze in those grooves. I'm just taking a needle tool and I'm basically just chipping it out. So this takes a little bit of time. Had I been a wee bit more careful when I applied it, I would have less of this to do. But don't apply underglaze over it, just chip it out. Now I'm using a stiff bristled brush to just gently take off that the debris that is loose in the lines there. And again, don't reapply the underglaze because that'll be all messy. Next, I'm going to clean the bottom. I'm going to use the pencil trick, and I am cleaning off my table there. Remember that the pencil trick is when you lay a pencil flat on the table, and then you rotate the pot to create a line that's 1/8 of an inch up from the table surface. Now, everything beneath that line, I'm going to sponge away. It's very important that I sponge off that last 1/8 of an inch of glaze before the table surface. So again, lay the pencil flat, rotate it, and then you have a line that's 1/8 of an inch up. This keeps the glaze from being too close to the kiln shelf, and it helps it not to stick in the kiln. If you bring the glaze all the way down to the corner, it's going to get stuck. So everything from the bottom, everything beneath that 1/8 of an inch line. So if I hold the pencil there, you can see it's like 1/8 of an inch up from the flat surface. And this is probably the most important step that you guys need to remember in glaze prep before it gets fired. It helps to keep your bottoms clean and to prevent it from getting stuck to the patties. And you can always double check it with a pencil again and make sure that you have nothing beneath the pencil line. Again, just wiping all my pieces. And lastly, we're going to clean the table up for the next part. Now I'm going to make patties. A patty is a thin catch piece of clay. It's going to be about the thickness of a tortilla, so very, very thin. I'm just needing small patties, so I'm going to take a golf ball size hunk and I stretch it, kind of tossing it sideways so the bottom hits first. So as I do this, the bottom hits first and the top stretches away from it. So I want to make my patties and then I'll be cutting them an appropriate size. The patty needs to be a little bit bigger than the base of the pot. Now before I handle the pots, clean your hands off. So as I put the pot on there, I'm going to trim it so it's 3/4 of an inch bigger than the base of the pot. Or you can think the thickness of your thumb, the width of your thumb, make it bigger. So I need a patty for all of my cone 6 glaze pieces. So if it's a little bit small, just stretch it, make it a little bit bigger. Notice it's about the thickness of your thumb bigger. Next, we're going to go get a kiln ticket. So you want to fill out your kiln ticket. I keep mine to the right of my light switch in this little basket. You're going to provide all the information on there. This is a stoneware clay body. You would put your name, your bell, the date, and then you will need to write out all the glazes that you used because I'm checking your glazes. Here you're going to make sure that you have wiped your bottom and up the corners and done the patty. Now you're going to place the patty flat on the wear board, pot on the patty, your completed kiln ticket next to it, and then this is my indication that it's ready for firing.
All right, so I wanted to show you the glaze results after they have been fired to a cone 6 firing. Now this is the vase where I put the black underglaze in the carved lines, sponged off the upper parts, and then I just took a paintbrush, small paintbrush, and I brushed the white areas. Now remember that I did get some white occasionally in there and I chipped it out as best I could, but occasionally I do have some areas where the white is still visible. But if you're very careful, and I wasn't all that careful, I was in a little bit of a hurry, you can probably do a neater job than me. Now, students, just so you know, this is brushing. Later in the semester, I'm going to show you another technique that is a little bit more advanced and a little bit easier to do these small areas with a bulb syringe, but we'll get to that later. The pansy purple on this one was a little bit of a disappointment for me. It looks like I applied it a little bit thin. I thought I did 3 layers. Maybe it just was a little bit thin in the jar, but typically pansy purple comes out more of that dark purple rather than the light. It actually still looks kind of cool, but I was not expecting so much of the blue. That's an indication that it's a little bit thin. Now let's look at the other vase that I did. Excuse me. This one has the light Shino on it and over the slip trailing. Notice that certain glazes will do what's called breaking over texture, and all of the Shinos are known for this. So if you use something with Shino in the name, whether it's light Shino or sunrise Shino, or even a few others like espresso bean, it's in the Shino family, desert sage is in the Shino family, it would all make those nice brown kind of edges on texture, and it really shows up nicely on the slip trailing. And if I rotate this, this is the one where I had the applique, the super thin slabs, and there's desert sage on the leaves down here. Truth be told, I completely forgot to actually glaze the flower part. I was going to add glaze to that and I failed to. Now, if I wanted to, I could go back in there and I could add some glaze and I could refire this to a cone 6 firing. It is possible to refire, but you have to realize that once you already have layers all over this, like you don't want to keep applying layers to this because then it would run. I could apply layers to this, but because the clay is not very absorbent or porous at the time, it will take a long time to dry. So I might have to zap it with a hair dryer to get that dry so I can put on more layers. All right, let's look at this one. So this was the bowl with texture, and this is the one that has desert sage. And you can see that the edge of each of the texture areas has broken brown, and then the green is in the middle of the texture. It looks like maybe some parts might be thinner than others. Desert sage goes brown if it is a little bit thinner, and it always will thin or break on the edge. That's why it's brown there. The interior looks like I did Chino with red gold over the top, and I did stripes. You may remember I did some rings around it. Now, red gold is one of the Artie's base series. It has stop signs on it, and that's known to be a runner when you put it over another glaze. And we don't use it by itself on our clay bodies because it can chip off after firing. That's called shivering. But what's kind of cool is when you put it on there and you get some runs. Okay, so that was Chino with red gold. Let's look at this bowl. So this was the bowl where I did underglaze around the flowers, and then I brushed the Celadon key lime on top of the underglaze. Now remember that Celadon is a type of glaze. It's not the color. So the color is key lime. The series or the family of glazes is called a Celadon, which means it is transparent. It has a transparent quality to it. As does the Dusty Rose. That's a Celadon, but the Pansy Purple in the middle is not a Celadon. But you can see that where I went over the underglaze, you can see right through it. So that's kind of a cool quality about using underglaze and Celadons. And there is my alabaster white in the middle. And then this one is the one where I put underglaze in the carved lines and the key lime over it. And then this was the carved like area, the sculptural area that I carved. Notice that when you have vertical lines, your glaze can use those to actually kind of funnel it and run down. So that's why it kind of accumulated right there. It just ran right down that sculptural line. So you just have to be careful if you have like a whole bunch of vertical textures. If you put on too much glaze, it can funnel right down to the bottom. And there I accidentally have, that was something that was, it was on my pot from the first firing. It was something that was on the kiln shelf. I think I got it on something messy. Now this last one, I didn't actually show me glazing it, but it came out really nicely, so I wanted to show you. So this is another pinch bowl. It just wasn't in the video when I made it. This is desert sage, and again, it just shows you how lovely desert sage is on a texture, even a delicate texture like this. It works really well. And then the interior, I also did the rings of gunmetal green, just like I did the red gold on the other bowl. It's rings of gunmetal green on top of the desert sage, and it really usually looks pretty cool. So
hopefully you have enjoyed and learned something today, and drop me any comments below if you're not one of my students, if you have a question. And I hope you subscribe and enjoy and keep potting if you can.